Self and mind, from Descartes to the anti-Cartesians. Descartes had a still appealing picture of human beings, our makeup, and of ourselves, of what makes us who we are. According to this picture, we are a combination of a body and a mind, and it is our minds, immaterial entities responsible for our thoughts and feelings, that make us who we are. That is, our minds are ourselves. The idea that the mind is an immaterial entity has lost some traction, but many still believe that the brain, or some part of the brain, can be identified with the mind, or at least its basis, and therefore with the self. Let's focus in on one part of the Cartesian picture, the self. One anti-Cartesian view of the self is animalism. According to animalism, it is not our minds that make us who we are, but our bodies. A long debate has ensued between psychological and animalist accounts of the self. But some think there are questions to be asked about this debate. Why can't both kinds of features be part of who you are? And what about the social and relational features that matter so much to people? Their absence from this scheme has long been noted by feminist and communitarian scholars resisting the individualism and atomism of our age. Rather than ask whether it is psychological or bodily traits that make up the self, we can start anew and ask what makes a trait part of the self in the first place. Wallace argues that a person has a whole network of traits, psychological, social, bodily, and any other kind you can think of. These traits have many different kinds of relationship. They can cause, explain, constitute, and entail each other. Those that are most central, that play the biggest role in organizing the overall web of traits, are the ones that are part of yourself, that make you who you are. Enter the relational self. Some bodily features and some psychological features may be central to organizing your web of traits, and therefore part of the self, but so too are social and relational features. On now to the other part of the Cartesian picture, the mind. One anti-Cartesian position on the mind is the view of the mind as embodied and extended. According to this view, the brain alone is not the basis of the mind. It works in tandem with parts of the body beyond the brain and parts of the world beyond the skin. Mind and self still don't align. The extended and embodied mind views emphasize dense, two-way, causal interactions between the brain, body, and world, while the relational self is interested in causal and non-causal relationships, which are often one-way. The self is therefore not the mind, even if the mind is extended and embodied. But Descartes, when he came up with the concept of mind, identified it with the self. He claimed that it was responsible for feeling, thought, perception, and intelligent behavior. He also claimed that it was immaterial. In the 19th and early 20th century, some neuroscientists tried to save the mind by claiming that although not immaterial, the brain is at least responsible for these capacities and can therefore be identified with the mind and with the self. Supporters of the embodied and extended mind deny that the brain is the sole basis of the mind, but they still find a new material system to be identified with the mind. Maybe it's time for anti-Cartesianism to go one step further. Maybe there is no mind at all. I have argued elsewhere that it is extremely hard to apply the concept to human beings, because there are multiple distinct, sophisticated systems responsible for thought, feeling, perception, and intelligent behavior. The immune system, working with the brain, can generate moods and behavior, dispositions, and is at the heart of our responses to stress and trauma. The cardiovascular system is heavily involved in threat response and in the implementation of emotional reactions. The skin is involved in perception through touch. The gut-brain axis is proving to be a fruitful topic of study for psychiatry, with the gut, including the bacteria living there, involved in complex ways in emotion, cognition, and our general well-being. The endocrine system, for hormonal signaling, is involved in every aspect of emotion, cognition, and mood. Even the musculoskeletal system is involved in the propagation of stress and trauma, and in the immune and endocrine systems functioning. Add these together, and you have more or less the entire human being. And on top of these systems, we rely on the scaffolding of the outside world beyond the skin. Pick a particular activity and a particular timescale, and you can identify a system responsible for that capacity or activity on that timescale. But there is no one system responsible for all the capacities, even on a single timescale, let alone over every timescale, and so no one system that can readily be called the mind. Instead of a mind, there is a plurality of systems and resources that share between them responsibility for thought, feeling, and intelligent behavior, and between them are responsible for every biological and psychological process. The Cartesian picture also came with a view of the role of the brain and our relationship with the world. But if there's no mind, then what is the brain? And how should we account for self-reflection and autonomy in the absence of a unified inner core like the mind? It turns out that these questions are best dealt with together. In Sources of the Self, Taylor argues that Descartes' views of self and mind were part of a long historical trajectory from Plato to the Romantics of the internalization of the self. While it has its disadvantages, in Taylor's view, the internalized self is an indispensably useful idea. The core idea of the internalized self is that of a unique, unified locus of thought and feeling, a mind. The committed anti-Cartesian, Rorty, summarizes the idea of the mind as a single inner space in which bodily and perceptual sensations, mathematical truths, moral rules, the idea of God, moods of depression, and all the rest of what we now call mental are objects of quasi-observation, passing in review before a single inner eye. Taylor believes that this is necessary for an account of self-control, self-reflection, self-reflected reason, and hence autonomy. But it also comes with disadvantages. An impoverished view of our place in the world. Social relations, joint action, and joint cognitive activity are all mediated by representations in the mind. An atomistic view of individuals as strongly prior to the societies of which they are a part. The tendency to mistake an achievement or ideal of rational self-rule as something which is already established in our constitution, because we have minds. The disenchantment of nature. The world is merely bits of dead matter bumping into each other. Colour, value, wonder, and morality are all projected onto the world from inside our minds. Given these problems, the question then becomes whether it is possible to give an account of self-reflection and self-control without a unified and unique inner space, without a mind. Such an account might give us what we want without the disadvantages of internalization. Wallace aims to build just such a theory. Building on the theory of Mead, she accounts for self-reflection and autonomy as a matter of putting perspectives and attitudes gained from one's social world into conversation. The views of our parents, our social groups, our identity groups, our teachers and our friends are put into conversation by us and used as the grounds for reflective critique of one another. This same process of putting perspectives in conversation is at the core of decision-making and action. I as philosopher want to keep working, but I as friend want to call my friend. I as philosopher and friend want to offer a particular, and possibly unwelcome, kind of advice. Urges and attitudes can stem from our bodies and biological inheritance as well. Think of disgust or the urge to eat. Like those views gained from the outside world, these can be the basis of refining or rejecting other perspectives and views, or they can be refined or rejected on the basis of them. Think inside out, but orders of magnitude more complex. The brain is what makes this conversation possible in the first place, comprising endless, overlapping and mutually regulating networks of activity. It regulates and monitors every bodily system, as well as receiving perceptions and storing information from the outside world. It is not a mind, a system responsible for thought, feeling and so on, and nor is it a self making us who we are. But what it does is no less impressive. It is an orchestrator, regulator, balancer and mediator, the conductor of a great improvisational symphony played across our social worlds, environmental scaffolds and biological systems. We started with the Cartesian view of people, minds, and selves. And we have ended up with a relational view of selves, a denial of the mind in favour of a view of human beings as a big, messy bundle of overlapping systems, and a view of the brain as the mediator of an enormous conversation and conductor of an improvisational orchestra.